together they're working on this project I already mentioned to establish the TAM Museum in Berlin. The floor is for both of you for the next 7.5 minutes, maybe, to give you a chance.
It is an honor for us to speak today about representation of minorities in museum contexts, how this shapes powerfully the understanding around minorities, and why we think it is important to establish new museums with a new approach. As someone who is of Turkish heritage, while navigating life in Germany, I have lived at the intersection of multiple stories told about us, stories ignored, and stories we are just beginning to tell. These stories matter. They define who belongs, who contributes, and ultimately who is seen as part of the collective we. But stories can also diminish, isolate, and stigmatize. As Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie put it, there is a danger of a single story. For the minority group from Turkey, the dominant narrative of guest workers has done exactly that, painting us as everlasting newcomers, even generations after. But how long can one remain as a guest? At what point does this story cease to reflect reality and begin to obscure it? When you hear the same story repeatedly, they can become internalized. They restrict how we see ourselves and how others see us. That's why I was astonished when I began to uncover stories revealing historical entanglements over 500 years that were never part of the mainstream narrative. They opened my eyes to see the flaw in how we define identities and also who is defining them. People with a migration background from Turkey, as we are categorized in German statistics, have different and diverse identities. Even we, us too, are very different. We have different stories and identities, but we still are usually put in the same drawer. Even well-intentioned efforts to represent the Turkish migrants often fail to ask the deeper question, why must there always be an us and a them? Why can stories stand on their own as complex and diverse as the people who live them? This lack of nuance doesn't just limit understanding, it actively erases realities.
Museums are uniquely positioned to challenge these reductive narratives as spaces that shape how societies understand themselves today. They have the power to amplify voices, bridge divides, create empathy, and foster knowledge. And yet, too often, museums fall short. Instead of dismantling the single story, they reinforce it. In Germany, many cultural institutions still put the typical narrative frame around Turkish communities solely through the lens of migration and economic utility. The story of the guest worker remains the central narrative. It is already problematic in itself that there is a need for a frame, but it is very difficult to criticize the idea of framing as it has been the standard. Change and inclusion is still only a project and could not be realized within institutions' own structures which resist to change. The political consequences of this failure are profound and extend far beyond culture. In the face of rising far-right movements in Germany and across the globe, these limited stories are weaponized. They are used to justify exclusion, to reduce minorities to burdens or economic tools, to fuel divisive policies. Time is critical. If we allow this wave to rise unchecked, the opportunity to change these narratives will become even harder to seize. It is also crucial to realize that it is not a fight only belonging to minorities, but society as a whole. Whole means TAM in Turkish. We chose TAM as a name for the museum we are founding in Berlin to open up this single story. TAM Museum is supported by people from all backgrounds that see this threat, but also the potential that lies within using the power of museums. Independent institutions like the TAM Museum are necessary, not because the Turkish-German story needs its own museum to retreat into, but because museums, as they currently exist, are not fulfilling their role.
But this work cannot be left to one museum, one community, or one country. This is a call to all cultural institutions to do better, to tell richer, fuller stories, to reimagine what is displayed, who decides it, and whose voices are heard. We must bring in new curators, scholars, and artists, those whose experiences reflect the stories we need to hear. Representation in art and culture is not just about fairness or inclusion, it is about the survival of pluralism itself. In times of political polarization, the stories we tell should become acts of resistance and renewal. We need to shift the focus of storytelling, moving away from explaining identities to exploring them, from reinforcing boundaries to opening perspectives. The TAM Museum aims to do just that, to reject ethno-national myths, challenge monolithic narratives, and celebrate the transcultural identities that reflect the realities of our societies today. It stands as a response to the rising tide of exclusion, demonstrating that cultural diversity is not a threat, but a gift.
We recommend establishing a network to enable knowledge exchange among institutions and groups that will develop strategies challenging the single story on minorities. We, as the largest minority living in Germany, are not the only ones that are affected by being the subjects of the single story. It resonates globally, whether it's Mexicans in the US, Kurds in Turkey, Roma in basically every European country, and many others. Let us commit to changing the single stories we tell through museums, through art, and through culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you.